I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today we are going to talk about emergence. Consider a system composed of parts. System-level effects are resultant if they are merely the result of the vector sum of the effects of the parts of the system. For instance, the weight of a bottle of water is the sum of the individual weights of the bottle, its cap, the water, and the air in the bottle. System-level effects are emergent if they cannot be calculated in such a way, because there is something more at the system level than just the vector sum of the effects of its parts. It is as if the weight is more when the individual parts of the bottle of water are put together. We know that in the case of the bottle of water, that is not the case. However, consider a beehive. The collective behavior of the hive is more than the sum of the behavior of the individual bees. Together, they form something greater than if you just considered the individual bees' actions separately. The same happens in many collectives, say a band, orchestra, choir, sports team, platoon, or society, versus a population of musicians, singers, athletes, soldiers, or people each doing their own thing, as if they were alone and then just summed together. In all these cases, they become more because they are not just independent atoms with no reciprocal effects, atoms doing their own thing in the same space, but as if the other atoms are not there. Their individual behavior is modified in the presence of others, sometimes in small, insignificant ways, but sometimes in transformative ways, both positive and negative. The flute player may have to change his tempo or volume from his usual to match with the other instrumentalists. The defender in a football team, not wanting to let his teammates down, may be able to reach new heights of skill and endurance he did not know he possessed. The emergent may also be harmful. A football team may have individual players that are highly talented, but when put together, because of a lack of teamwork, end up losing to a team with less talented individuals, but who are able to work well with one another. People coming together to live as a society may elevate one another, each bringing to the collective their respective gifts that as individuals would have had less impact. For instance, a highly skilled physician living alone with no one to treat has less impact than if he lived in a community. They may also harm one another. The noise, overcrowding, oppressive norms, and competition for jobs and resources may lead to mental illness that an individual living in isolation may not have developed. According to G.H. Lewis, emergentism is a theory about the structure of the natural world. It relates properties of a system to the properties of its parts and realizes their irreducibility. Two alternative theories about the world are reductionistic mechanism and anti-reductionistic vitalism. Mechanists believe that system-level properties are resultant effects fully explainable, that is, reducible in principle in terms of the properties and relations of its parts. Vitalists believe that life and spirit in living things are fundamental and irreducible to the physics, chemistry, and biology of those things. They may posit a vital force, an élan vital, as the source of the life and spirit in living things, introducing this force as an external factor to account for the phenomena. On the contrary to these two theories, emergentists adopt a middle way according to Elie Vintiadis, who wrote the article on the topic in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which this essay is mainly but not entirely based on. She writes, "Against the mechanist, the whole is more than the sum and arrangement of its parts. Yet, against the vitalist, without anything being added to it from the outside. That is, there is no need to posit any mysterious intervening entelechy to explain irreducible emergent properties. Emergentists can agree that things are made of matter. However, at different levels of organization and complexity, the same matter may exhibit different properties. These properties may be novel in the sense that they are not resultant from the properties of its parts, or are found at higher levels of organization and complexity. Emergentists consider their position as naturalistic because it is based on empirical evidence, on observations of how things are in the world. They do not feel that they need to resort to extra-natural powers to explain them. However, because emergent properties are not calculable or reducible, there is an epistemological difficulty in explaining how they arise. It is as if something new has come into the world when things are organized in a complex system. Early emergentist Samuel Alexander, around 1920, considers emergent phenomena as brute empirical facts of which no explanation can be given. Instead, it should be accepted with natural piety. The beginning of the emergentist movement, however, traces back to John Stuart Mill's System of Logic published in 1843. His paradigmatic example of emergence, though he does not use the term, is chemical reactions. The products of chemical reactions have different properties from their reactants. For instance, hydrogen burned in oxygen gives water. Water has properties that neither hydrogen nor oxygen has. The special sciences, chemistry, biology, and psychology, are also examples of emergence. They are not reducible to physics and also not reducible to one another. Biologist C. Lloyd Morgan, around 1923, introduces the concept of emergence into the process of evolution. As living things evolve, new properties and behaviors that cannot be predicted from those of their ancestors emerge. C.D. Broad, around 1925, talks about how reality is structured in different orders. Around the same time, Nikolai Hartmann proposed his ontology of strata or levels, though Hartmann did not consider himself as an emergentist. Like Hartmann, Broad thinks that there are intra-ordinal laws within an order, or level and transordinal laws between orders. Transordinal laws are not reducible to intra-ordinal laws and are hence fundamental. Fundamental here does not mean what has been around since the beginning of time, that is, primitive. It also does not mean basic as in what serves as a building block. Emergent laws are fundamental in the sense that they are irreducible to the theories explaining the lower levels. If, through increased knowledge in the future, we are able to explain what is presently considered an emergent property, then it is in fact not emergent. Broad raises qualia as something he thinks is truly emergent. Qualia is the subjective conscious experience we have of things, for example, color or sensations like pain. No words or quantification, say the wavelength of the color red, will be able to capture completely the qualitative experience of red for a person who has never seen red. For Broad, emergence is hence not an epistemological but an ontological issue. Another way epistemological emergence can be understood is that explanations can be higher or lower level, though reducibility from the higher to the lower level is at least in principle possible. For instance, a high-level description of a gas can be in terms of its temperature, according to the kinetic theory of gases, which posits that the temperature of a gas is proportional to the kinetic energy of its molecules. While it may be useful or convenient to use the high-order parameter of temperature to discuss what is happening with the gas, we can also have discussed it in terms of the movement of each of its molecules after which they are vector summed. What prevents us from doing so is that it will make the description of the gas very cumbersome, but still, it is in principle possible. The two different descriptions, temperature and movement of molecules, can be considered two different levels of description, the former at the macro level and the latter at the micro level, though both describe the same thing. This contingent identity thesis posits that every regularity described in the language of higher levels, including those of biological function and human intentionality, is causally redundant. All the causal work occurs at the fundamental level of concrete physical particulars, requiring only bridging principles to reconcile them completely. Another example is society and its atoms that comprise it, its people. Margaret Thatcher, a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, seems to be making an epistemological emergent claim when she said in 1987, "There is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families, and no government can do anything except through people." What ontological emergence posits is that there is indeed such a thing as society, since novel emergent properties are of a different kind altogether, making them irreducible to lower-level explanations. Epistemological emergence falls under weak emergence, while ontological emergence falls under strong emergence. Strong emergence contends that there exist some systems that has something over and above its parts. A novel emergent property is irreducible to properties of these systems' parts because of the ontological difference between the emergent system and its parts. An explanatory gap arises not because of a lack of knowledge or cumbersome explanations, but because something ontologically novel has emerged. What constitutes novelty in emergence? The earlier example of a resultant effect of the weight of the system being the sum of the weight of its parts is to some extent novel, since none of the individual parts have the weight of the system. The system also is novel, since it is an entity composed of but distinct from its parts. It is a numerical novelty. Numerical novelty and resultant novelty are not the kinds of novelty that characterizes emergence. The novelty behind emergence is, according to Vintiadis, causal novelty. She defines strong emergence as 1. At a certain level of physical complexity. 2. Novel properties appear that are not shared by the parts of the object they emerge from. 3. They are ontologically irreducible to the more fundamental matter from which they emerge. And 4. That contribute causally to the world. For something to be real, it must have causal powers, is a dictum attributed to Alexander. The idea being that only real things can cause real effects. Causes and effects go together. If there are no effects that can be detected, then we have no way to know that the purported cause exists. Emergent properties have new downward causal powers, downward causation being causation from macroscopic levels to microscopic levels. This causal relation can be expressed as an emergent law. To properly understand this downward direction of causation, we need to understand supervenience. Supervenience is a covariation between two sets of properties, subvenient properties and supervenient properties. A change at the supervenient level entails a change at the subvenient level. For instance, mental states are thought to supervene on neuronal states. A change in mental state, say from calm to agitated, will simultaneously entail a change in neuronal activity. Emergent properties are downward causal because it is the change at the supervenient or higher level that is the cause of the change at the subvenient or lower level. For instance, it is the change in mental state from calm to agitated that causes the change in neuronal state that causes a person to start shouting and not the converse, where the change in neuronal state is what causes a person to become agitated. In weak emergence, the system's emergent property is unpredictable, incalculable, or unexpected from the properties of its parts, but it is not irreducible to them. It is hence an epistemological type of emergence, and is compatible with reducibility even though it is incalculable. A weakly emergent system property may be explainable in principle by the theory governing the lower level parts, but yet is incalculable because their calculations may be so cumbersome that the resultant system behavior can only be derived through simulation, making these explanations incompressible. Hence, weak emergence is reducible, though incompressible, and is therefore not downward causal, as causal power resides in the parts and not the system. My earlier example on the kinetic theory of gas is a case of weak emergence. In principle, the temperature of a gas can be worked out from the movement of its gas molecules. Hence, the macro-emergent property is reducible to what is happening at the molecular level, though this cannot be done by solving the equations of motion analytically for each of the molecules, since it will be too cumbersome, as they not only move but collide with one another and with the walls of their vessel. One way to resolve the problem of analysis would be to simulate on a computer how the molecules will move and interact using small discrete time steps to play out in an accelerated manner their movements and interactions. In scientific circles, weak emergence is associated with complexity, functional organization, self-organization, and non-linearity. Some weak emergentists, like strong emergentists, attribute the emergent property to the organization of the system, and some believe that weak emergence is common while resultant aggregation is what is rare in nature. Another way the emergence pie can be cut is through time, yielding synchronic and diachronic emergence. The term synchronic means at the same time, while diachronic means at different times. Synchronic emergence is associated with supervenience, where higher level activity is accompanied by lower level activity simultaneously, such as in the example of mental states and neuronal states. Neither precedes the other. Strong ontological emergence is often considered synchronic because of the irreducibility of such emergence. Diachronic emergence evolves over time, where the structure from which the emergent property emerges already exists prior to its emergence, and is considered to be weak emergence since such emergence is unpredictable. However, the link between time of emergence and strong or weak emergence is not definitive, since there can be strong emergence that is diachronic, for instance with society, and weak emergence that is synchronic, for instance with the example of the gas. Kim Jae-won, around 1999, poses an objection to strong emergence, specifically targeting the downward causal powers of emergent properties. His objection is based on three physicalist assumptions. 1. Causal closure. There is a causal closure of the physical domain, that is, all physical effects have sufficient physical causes. 2. Causal exclusion. If an event has a sufficient cause, there is no other cause. 3. Supervenience. A supervenient property corresponds to a subvenient property at the same time. If such a supervenient property is present, the subvenient physical property must also be present and vice versa. Causal closure and causal exclusion together imply that for physical events, there are no other kinds of causes than physical causes. Following Alexander's dictum that what is real has causal powers, if mental properties are real, they must be able to cause real effects. In mind-body supervenience, a mental state M supervenes on a physical state P. Supervenience is an appropriate relation between mental and physical properties since the mental emerged from the physical, X hypothesis. Suppose M causes another mental state, M star. M star, because of supervenience, corresponds to physical state, P star. Is M, P, or P star the cause of M star? Given causal exclusion, it cannot be all of them. Based on the downward causation of emergent properties, M causes M star through causing P star. That is, mental to mental causation through mental to physical causation. Given causal closure, P star must have a sufficient physical cause, which is P. However, given causal exclusion, P star cannot have two sufficient causes, M and P. Hence, given causal closure, causal exclusion, and supervenience, P is the cause of P star, which makes M merely epiphenomenal, where a mental phenomenon accompanies the physical phenomenon but has no causal power. The contraposition of Alexandra's dictum is, what is not real has no causal power. Hence M, because it is epiphenomenal, is not real, making the mental merely a useful fiction. Kim's argument highlights the tension between causal closure of the physical domain and the causal power of non-physical mental properties. It targets strong emergence, which posits irreducibility and novel causal powers, and not weak emergence, where the emergent's causal powers are constituted by the causal power of its parts. Supervenience may seem to be a suitable assumption since emergent properties emerge out of a physical base, but that only works if that type of emergence is synchronous. Based on Kim's argument, either causal closure or novel emergent powers must be denied. The latter is what physicalists do by denying there is anything other than the physical, or what idealists do, where all is mental and there is no physical world. However, there are possible resolutions that do not deny but dissolve the problem. Panpsychists may propose that the mental has in fact always been there in everything, including the inanimate, but is latent within the parts of the system. Neutral monists may propose that mental and physical properties are one and the same. Denying causal closure, though, is the response of the strong emergentists, that indeed something new has appeared in the world and hence is a novel cause. In the case of the mental, this is tantamount to mind-body dualism, but how the mental can affect the physical and vice versa have remained a problem since the dualist position was posed by René Descartes in the 17th century. Another saline objection is that there are no things that are strongly emergent. We simply have not yet found a suitable explanatory theory to account for them, as epistemological emergentists may claim. What was considered strongly emergent, such as chemical reactions and even the phenomenon of biological life, may now be reclassified as weakly emergent or non-emergent altogether, due to advances in quantum mechanics applied to chemistry and molecular biology, which may be able to explain and predict what was previously thought irreducible and unpredictable, if not in actuality, since life has not yet been synthesized in the laboratory from inorganic substrates, at least in principle. Strong emergence, however, posits that there can be no such unified theory that will capture both low and emergent high-level phenomena, since strongly emergent phenomena are irreducible. It is precisely because the properties of the parts cannot explain what is happening in an emergent system that emergence was posited in the first place. To search for a unified theory is to try to reduce the irreducible, to try to bridge the explanatory gap with physical explanations when the gap exists precisely because there are no physical explanations adequate to the task. Richard J. Campbell and Mark H. Bighart around 2011 pose a possible way to close the explanatory gap. They present a process approach to tackle what may be the underlying metaphysics of emergence. They first attack the physicalist premise that things are made of matter, which, as noted early in this essay, is something that many emergentists also accept. The physicalists claim that whatever properties the system has are reducible to the properties of its parts, a part-whole relation of bigger things composed of smaller things. If we go down to the most micro level, these parts will be the elementary particles. Thus, all properties must ultimately be reducible to the causal powers of the elementary particles, be they atoms or quarks. The physicalist view also assumes that the relations between the parts play no constitutive role. A molecule is comprised of its atoms and the elementary particles that hold these atoms together. How these atoms and particles are organized in time and space are irrelevant to the properties of the molecule. However, as modern physics informs us, at the most elementary or smallest level, what exists are not particles, but according to quantum field theory, fields. Hence, to insist on things as the basis on which causation arises is mistaken, since it assumes a substance or particle metaphysics, which is shaky and dogmatic given the best science we have today. The idea that there is a base level which supports higher level emergent phenomena, and that base is ultimately elementary particles, is hence problematic. They write, since everything is an organization of quantum field processes, more complex organization of processes can yield emergent properties and powers, but it is the higher level organization itself that is doing the work, not whatever might be its constituents. Any field view destroys the seduction into a microparticle reduction because configurational and organizational properties make differences in causal power, not just in the working out of lower order causal power. At bottom are not atoms or even elementary particles but quantum fields. Elementary particles and subsequently concrete things come into existence because of the way fields interact, which are the configuration and organization of fields. What is being organized and configured in fields are not things but processes. Some processes are fleeting, while those that we consider to be things can also be thought of as stable processes. Campbell and Bicard posit that there are two forms of process stability: energy well stability and far from equilibrium stability. Energy well are in or near thermodynamic equilibrium for an extended period. To change their organization, they require energy input, a higher amount of energy than what they encounter in their ambient environment. Without it, they remain stable and robust at the macro level. Atoms, for instance, are stable energy wells, but this stability comprises a furious process of electron waves around an even more furious dance of quarks and gluons. The atom is a process comprised of other processes, and the totality of these processes, which is the atom, is dynamically stable at the macroscopic level. They note that aggregation is itself a form of spatial temporal organization, and that more is involved in being a causally effective aggregate than simply the logical sum, a bare conjunction of its constituents. The components have to stick together. In my previous example of the chemical reaction of hydrogen and oxygen, it is not a matter of simply putting together the two elements in a jar. They will not form water that way. Without a spark, fire, to ignite the hydrogen, there is no reaction. To get an emergent property, in this case the properties of the product, water, the hydrogen and oxygen atoms have to stick together. Energy needs to be added to the reactants since they were otherwise separate when let out of the jar. Energy in combination with the quantum fields of the hydrogen and oxygen atoms yield water's quantum field. As for systems in far from equilibrium stability, the unstable system nonetheless persists. One way it persists is that it is kept going artificially, entirely by external means. I have an example. Say an injured person, Jamie, requires a walking stick in order to stand. Jamie with his stick is stable. Without the stick, Jamie is unable to stand. The equilibrium condition of Jamie is to fall to the floor, but by the use of his stick, Jamie, who by himself is not in equilibrium, manages to be stable. For Jamie, the stick counters the physical tendency to move towards equilibrium. Campbell and Bickhart provide another example of a candle flame. The flame can persist stably for hours so long as there is enough fuel and oxygen to feed the process. If there is, the process of the flame is stable. By removing either, say when the wax of the candle or the oxygen run out, the flame will stop. The candle will then be in a state of energy well equilibrium. Its body of wax in that state remains solid with a potential to release energy but requires external means to do so. The candle needs to be open to external factors such as oxygen and an initiating fire to light its wick into a flame. The persistence of far from equilibrium processes, such as the flame, is possible if and only if such crucial interchanges with the environment are able to persist. They are necessarily open processes, they explain. The heat of the candle's flame causes convection air currents, removing the waste product of its burning, carbon dioxide, and drawing in oxygen. It vaporizes the wax of the candle to become the flame's fuel. It keeps the reaction going by maintaining the temperature above the combustion threshold. Campbell and Bickhart write, processes like this tend to maintain themselves. They exhibit self-maintenance. The ability to be self-maintaining is an emergent causal power of the organization of the candle flame. It cannot be explained simply as the physical resultant of the causal properties of its distinct constituents. Living things are also good examples of far from equilibrium but stable systems. Consider a human being completely separated from the environment. She will not be able to survive beyond a few minutes since she will suffocate, not being able to breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. If she cannot feed or drink, she will starve, and if she cannot get rid of waste matter through defecation, she will become poisoned. It is only through these exchanges with the external world that she is able to remain stable. Yet the need for these exchanges to remain stable demonstrates she is out of equilibrium. If these exchanges vanish, she will come into equilibrium, but that would mean her death. Living things exhibit a further level of complexity that can maintain stability not only in certain ranges of conditions, but also within certain ranges of changes of conditions. They do this by deploying different processes depending on conditions they detect in the environment. Campbell and Bickhart's example is a bacterium that swims up a sugar gradient but tumbles if it's swimming down a sugar gradient. It is able to detect the gradient and respond accordingly, exhibiting a maintenance of its own ability to be self-maintenance. They add, it exhibits recursive self-maintenance. It is in that way self-reflexive. Human beings are also adaptive to changes. In the winter, we wear more clothing in order to maintain our body temperature, and in the summer, less clothing for the same reason. Campbell and Bickhart write, biological systems, including humans, are not substantial entities whose constituents are cells, which in turn, after a few more reductions, are constituted out of elementary particles. They are open organized action systems in essential interactions with their environment such that we cannot say what they are without taking those interactive processes into account. Campbell and Bickhart's thesis is that emergence comes from the organization of the system and not just its parts. They reject the physicalist idea that causal power ultimately resides in an emergent base, since at bottom in modern physics, there is no particle base to speak of, but only quantum fields. Even the simplest atom, hydrogen, is more than its proton and electron. There is also the pattern of the relationship between them, and that pattern of the process, its organization, is what is crucial to the emergent properties of hydrogen. The properties of its proton and electron are insufficient to account for the properties of hydrogen. Instead of viewing the atom as a particle, Campbell and Picard say that the atom is that organization of processes between the nucleus and the electron. The atom is an instance of energy well stability. For far from equilibrium stable systems, their internal organization requires external interactions with their surroundings to maintain their stability. Their very existence and their persistence are dependent upon their relations with external factors in that environment, from which they keep drawing sustenance, they add. These external factors are more than taking material from the environment. For the candle flame, its context is part of what sustains it. The existence of the flame relies on the difference in its temperature and its surroundings. If the ambient temperature is raised to the flame temperature, the convection currents that suck in oxygen and remove carbon dioxide will diminish, causing the flame to be smothered by the carbon dioxide it emits. The right conditions are hence vital to the flame's self-maintenance. The flame of the candle is also not the emergent base of the molecules of wax and the oxygen it draws in. The flame is a process of burning with no emergent base. Campbell and Picard thinks that the current way emergence is described with higher and lower levels of things can be misleading. Firstly, it presupposes a substance metaphysics, which they have explained is wrong, since modern physics shows that there is no substance, only quantum fields and hence only processes. Secondly, it envisages only self-contained systems, not open processes that require interactions with their environments to even exist and persist. Emergent spaces fails to articulate the context and external relations which are constitutive features in emergence. The physicalist substance metaphysical view takes the causal powers of the emergent space to be the only factors determining the higher levels, ignoring the crucial role of organization and the essential role of external relations in the self-maintenance of stable far from equilibrium process systems. In conclusion, strong emergence posits that due to increasing complexity or ways of organization of a system, emergent properties can arise that are not reducible even in principle to the properties of the system's parts. This explanatory gap is not due to a current ignorance or insufficient knowledge, but can never be bridged because what has emerged is ontologically novel, a new category. If it can be bridged, where the emergent property is in principle reducible to the properties of its parts, though with great difficulty, then it is weakly emergent, epistemologically emergent, but not ontologically emergent. Strong emergent hence poses an epistemological difficulty since it defies explanation. Explanations can come in several forms. Mechanism, vitalism, and finalism are three such forms, though strong emergentism does not fit since mechanism is reductionistic, while vitalism and finalism relies on external transcendent factors. Emergentists claim that emergent properties are just brute facts, verified by empirical observations of the world. One way they attempt to understand emergence is through theorizing a hierarchical, stratified structure of the world, and use concepts like supervenience to elucidate property dualism. Once you are aware of emergentism, you will see it everywhere. When we read a word, a sentence, a poem, or a text, if we look only at the letters of the alphabet of which they comprise, we will be unable to understand them since their meaning is not found in the letters. It is only when we look at the whole word, with the letters arranged in the correct order, that sense can be made of it. It is at the level of the word that meaning emerges, and it's not merely the parts, which are the letters, but also the organization of the parts. Lastly, it is only meaningful because there is an external mind to make sense of it. If we examine the individual notes of a piece of music, we will not be able to appreciate the effect that the whole composition produces. The musical composition is made from individual notes, but it is only at the level of the whole, of the arrangement of notes in that piece, that its beauty can be found. If the notes are not organized as it is in the composition, it may be an odd, ugly jumble of sound. Even if it is organized right, it still takes an intellect capable of appreciating music to appreciate it. If we look only at pixels, we will fail to recognize the picture. It is only at the level of the picture that we can make sense of it and not at the level of its pixels. Hence, emergence is not altogether an alien concept even in the mundane. However, text, music, and pictures rely on an intelligent being to comprehend their meaning, appreciate their beauty, and make sense of the system. Are emergent phenomena in the mind of the beholder only? In text, music, and pictures, an intelligent mind is needed to comprehend the emergent meaning and beauty. The Merchant of Venice, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, and the Mona Lisa will not make sense to a cat the way they may to a human being. But not all emergent phenomena are subjective. The products of a chemical reaction with their novel properties are not derivable from the properties of the reactants, and mental activity is not derivable from neuronal activity. These two processes of nature are strongly emergent, whether or not there is an intelligent observer. Hence, emergence may or may not be in the mind of the beholder. Strong emergence theory implies that at a certain level of complexity or way of organizing the parts in a particular system, something novel just happens, and it is inexplicable if the mode of explanation is to attempt, by using the properties of the parts, to predict or calculate what these new properties would be. All we can do is to identify that something new has emerged, and then analyze it not in terms of what it came from, but in terms of what it is now. This means that surprises may be in store for us when things are put together in ways yet untried, in the case of organization, or when many things are put together such that as a whole, as a system, they reach a certain level of complexity. Could it be that if enough neurons are connected together in a petri dish, that intelligence emerges? Analogously, if enough computers are networked together, will artificial general intelligence come forth? What is the tipping point? 1 billion neurons? 1 million computers? And what are the parts required for this emergent system to arise? Is it just neurons, or are the medium of the cerebrospinal fluid, blood, or even water necessary constituents? Must energy be added, the way lightning is needed to fixate the nitrogen in air to form nitrogen oxides? Is a catalyst needed to speed up an otherwise imperceptibly slow reaction, such as in the Haber process manufacturing ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen with an iron catalyst? Analysis may hence be insufficient to discover many processes, because analysis fails to account for organization, complexity, and external factors such as external energy and materials, and environmental conditions. Multiple trials may be needed, or careful observations of real-world events which already give the desired outputs. If emergence is unpredictable, incalculable, and yet irreducible, it does not mean we do not have enough knowledge, but it means we will never have enough knowledge. Emergence is tantamount to saying that the principle of sufficient reason is false. that the arrangement or organization of parts, when these arrangements reach a certain level of complexity, though this level is unknown in advance till it has been reached, can bring forth what was never there before. Our methods of explanation fail. We can only try to make sense of the emergent property ex post. We can of course simply deny that there is such a phenomenon as emergence, but yet we observe it and then replicate it. The empirical evidence precedes theory formation. What new theories we can come up with are not theories of explanations, but theories of analysis of the new, the parts and conditions required, the arrangements of these parts, and where to apply the conditions. We can know how to recreate the system, but we will not know why these combinations cause the emergent. We can analogize to try to produce the same emergent properties under the same conditions but with different parts, which is one of the approaches to create artificial general intelligence. If indeed emergence is real, it means there is no causal closure, that more serendipitous and inexplicable discoveries are installed that will surprise and confound us. They will be genuine discoveries, not inventions. A source of confusion is the physicalist assumption of things comprising of matter. If instead, things are understood not to be constituted at bottom of atoms and elementary particles, but instead of processes of quantum fields, the idea of why organization and complexity can yield emergent properties is less mystifying. It will help us recognize that emergence happens all the way down all levels of reality, since there is in fact no emergence base to base the stratified structure on. It would mean that emergence is a fundamental mechanism of reality. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.